KYYK 98.3, your hometown station. You're tuned in to the morning mess, and I am the captain of this ship. Cat Powers here with you. And on the phone, I have a very, very exciting gentleman. His name is Justin, and he's the founder of Accessible Beekeeping. And he's on the phone with us from Virginia. Good morning, Justin.
Good morning, Kat. How are you doing today?
I am just perfect. Thank you. I'm glad you took the time out to talk to me today because Jennifer, I had her on the show yesterday and she had talked about just your nonprofit and what you do. So, since you're new to the airwaves here, will you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Yes, as Kat said, my name is Justin Ruger. I live in Virginia. I was a PhD student in nuclear physics at the Catholic University of America, and then I had a car accident that gave me a TBI, stroke, and seizures, and I switched my plan for life from that to beekeeping when my family got into it. And I went to a conference in Tennessee called the Hive Life Conference, and it was huge. It had 800 people, and I met a lot of the companies, the founders of companies there, and they talked me into starting a nonprofit that help make beekeeping accessible because I am in a wheelchair for the majority of the time. I walk with a cane sometimes, but that's a little bit about me. I'm now, writing children's books and running the nonprofit.
Wow, that is such an inspiring story, Justin. So, when you say accessible beekeeping, what makes it more accessible? You mentioned you're in a wheelchair. So, what are some things that make the beehives and keeping the bees more accessible for you?
So some of the things are changing the hive type. So most people use Langstroth hives in their boxes, and they get to be about 80 pounds a piece when the bees have filled them out. And a company in North Carolina called Horizontal Bees designed a horizontal hive for me. So instead of stacking boxes vertically, it's a longer box that fits about 30 frames in it, which would be 3 boxes stacked. And it works to, you lift 1 frame at a time instead of boxes with 10 frames. And each frame is around, 8 pounds when it's fully filled. So what he did was he designed it, and because I'm in the wheelchair, instead of having to lift over, he made it so that it tilts forward to a
Oh,
45
smart.
degree angle. Yeah, to a 45 degree angle so that I can lift it out more like it's coming out of a bookshelf. There's another hive called a Lane's hive, which is similar to a horizontal hive, but the frames are deeper, and you're only lifting 1 frame at a time rather than a box of 10 frames, as I said. There is another hive type called a Slovenian AZ hive, and they designed this in Slovenia. And what you do is they build a box that has 10 frames side by side, but you open it from the back and you pull them out like you're pulling out a book from a bookshelf.
Wow, interesting. I had read on the website that you also, not just for wheelchair bound or amputees, but also for people that are blind and or deaf. So how do you do that if you are blind or deaf? What are some adjustments they've made there?
I have a friend in California who is blind, and she actually taught me a lot. She was on our podcast at Accessible Beekeeping on YouTube, and she talks about how she uses her hands. So most beekeepers wear gloves to not get stung, but since low vision or blind people, they cannot use gloves because taking away their touch is severely limits them in what they can do. So she doesn't use gloves, and she feels around, and the comb has different feelings to it. So, like, capped honey has a little indent. Worker brood, which is growing worker bee, is flat. And then drone brood is like a little bullet shaped. And the queen cells are like teardrops. So she feels around the frames, and then she takes pictures of it, and she sends it to a person who's seeing. And that person who's seeing tells her what she's looking at. And I am working on a program that will recognize things on the frame for low vision, because I recently had a fall and a seizure that took some of my eyesight away.
Uh-huh.
So I'm working on a program that will analyze the frames and tell people who are new beekeepers or low vision what they're looking at, so that they don't have to use the seeing person. They can be more independent.
Wow, that is so impressive. You are just bringing me into a whole new world that I know nothing about, and I know a lot of our listeners don't either. What are some of the benefits that you have gotten from beekeeping?
With the TBI, I lost some of my patience, so I'm not as patient, or I have mood swings sometimes. And going out there in the bee yard, or it's called an apiary, going out into the apiary is a completely surreal feeling. To me, going out in the apiary is like sitting on the beach with the breeze blowing, and you're just calm. You're in the moment. Nothing else matters. That's what it feels like to be in the apiary. So it calms me down. It lets me focus on something. They are very resilient creatures. So it works with people who are disabled, because you can go, you're supposed to do your inspections every 2 weeks, but sometimes you can't get out there every 2 weeks because of health reasons. So they are resilient and take care of themselves. So every 2 to 3 weeks, or even a month, they can't get into them. They take care of themselves. So it also removes some of the stress, as different if you were taking care of cows or goats that you had to make sure you fed every day.
Interesting. And so you've been doing this for how long?
Since 2017.
Okay, wow. And then you said your family did it before you, so you're kind of a generational beekeeper. Is that something you would agree with?
We kind of all started at the same time. So we started in 2015, and my grandfather passed away, and his inheritance was used to purchase a hive and honeybees, and my mother started it. And then I went out there after my after my car accident. I was in a wheelchair and I couldn't get out there to the bee yard or the apiary. So I would sit at the back deck and use the zoom lens to take pictures for my mother. And one of the best, when I have anxiety, they talk about guided imagery, and that's where you take yourself to a place that you remember, and you kind of walk through the smells and everything. And my best memory is the first time I got to wheel my wheelchair down to the apiary, stand up with my walker, and just experience being around the bees. So that's one of the guided imageries, anxiety that came with my TBI.
Wow, that is so incredible. Not only is it inspiring, but just how far you've came, and now the fact that you have founded a nonprofit to be able to help other people that, have accessibility issues. It really is inspiring. I hope you know that, Justin. I'm sure you feel inspired all the time, but I mean, that is something, you're definitely an asset to your community and honestly to everybody. If you don't mind, I want to touch on your children's books, but we're going to take a little break here. So if you're just joining us, I got Mr. Justin Ruger. He's the founder of Accessible Beekeeping. He's on the phone with us from Virginia this morning. So we're going to chat more with him coming up right after this break here. Okay, we are back in action. You're tuned in to KYYK 98.3, and I have Justin Ruger on the phone. He's the founder of Accessible Beekeeping. We were just chatting with him about everything that he's done with his nonprofit, making beekeeping and working with other people to make it more accessible for people with disabilities, like being wheelchair-bound, amputees, even people that are having blind issues or deafness. They're able to help and assist with those. But another aspect that you have done, Justin, is that you are a children's book author and illustrator. So how did you transition into that?
So, like I said before, I started off as a PhD student in nuclear physics, and I had my car accident November 7th, 2015. And I tried to do everything I could, from knitting, crocheting, to painting, and I just couldn't find that one thing that filled my time with pleasure. And my mother and my family started beekeeping, and my late aunt Shirley, she passed away during the big COVID years because of COVID. She told me that she wanted me to make a book about honeybees that she could use to read to her grandchildren. And we started it. I started working on it. It's called Henry Meets a Honeybee. It goes through pollination, the drone, queen, and worker bee roles, and the jobs within the hive, such as the cleaner bees, the scout bees, the foragers. And I published it through Amazon, so it's available on Amazon. And I used it to go to schools and libraries and do readings to teach children about honeybees. We followed that up with a children's book called Honey Teaches Beekeeping to Kids, and that one uses live photos and illustrations to teach kids about beekeeping. And there's two versions of that. There's one for younger kids, which has the two kids on it, and then there's Honey Teaches Beekeeping, which teaches older children with more information and more pages about how to be a beekeeper. And it's not a 100% how-to. It's more of an overview that says, hey, this is something you can do. This is what this career is about and how we do it. And I use it to inspire kids to do more research into being a beekeeper if they're interested.
Excellent. And so the first book you had was Henry Meets a Honeybee, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And then, so kind of give us a synopsis. What's that one about?
That's the one that I was saying was about pollination, the roles of queen, worker bees, and drones. Uh-huh. So I talk about what the queen does, what the worker bees do, and what the drone does. The drone is the only male bee in the colony. And then I go into the jobs of the worker bees. So I actually talk about how they clean and why they clean the hive, what the foragers do, what the guard bees do. And then at the end of the book, he makes a major decision in his life. And I do it a little differently. Instead of him just learning, I actually have a series of Henry books where he changes into the animal and actually goes inside their hives or their colonies and learns as that animal.
Interesting. How long did it take you to write those, and how long did it take you to illustrate those? I'm curious.
So the first book, I had a stroke in 2020, and it took me about a year because I had written the book before my stroke. And after the stroke, I used the iPad Pro and Procreate to illustrate the book, and I used it as rehab for the Lisa arm, because when I tried to draw on paper, it was ripping paper because I couldn't manipulate my arm as easily as I could before the stroke. So I used Procreate and the Apple Pencil to draw on a screen. And at first I began by using my left arm to move my right arm. Then I went into being able to move my right arm and do the drawings by itself. And it took me about a year and a half after my stroke to publish Henry Meets the Honeybee.
Wow. I mean, that is incredibly inspirational. I know I keep saying that, but it really, really is just the story that you're telling me about having a stroke and having to use one arm to move around the other one. And you still were able to publish a book and get these out there in the name of beekeeping. How can we help? How can we help further your mission and tell people where they can find your books as well, so that way they can order them, or if there's a website out there, tell people about that.
The first thing I can do is I can share with you a .carb link that they can go on, and it has a link to all my books and the nonprofit. The way they can further the nonprofit is on www.accessiblebeekeeping.org. There's the donation link, and there's a link to the podcast if you are interested in learning about how people with spina bifida, blindness, strokes, cerebral palsy, how they all keep bees. You can go on there and watch that podcast or find it on YouTube. You can donate to Accessible Beekeeping. We have a learning experimental apiary here in Virginia with 2 hive types that do not have bees in them because I was having a rough winter with my health, so I forgot to order the bees. So we're basically, you can financial donation, you can subscribe to YouTube, you can buy the book, which will also help the nonprofit. You can get all 4 books that I have on Amazon, and contact me through J. Ruger, Ruger, at accessiblebeekeeping.org if you are interested in a signed copy.
Okay, good information. And then also, like I said, we heard from Jennifer on the show yesterday, who owns Heavenly Harvest Apiary here in our area, and they're having a little fundraising event at the end of this month, April 29th from 10 to 4, and you can go to heavenlyharvestapiary.com. You can get your tickets for that, and then a portion of the proceeds, of course, will go towards Accessible Beekeeping with Justin's organization, and she'll even have some of the books there as well, so you could go in person and buy the books. You mentioned your podcast, which is on YouTube. Is that Accessible Beekeeping as well?
Yes, ma'am.
And then how often do you put out new podcast episodes?
We started with every week back in 2022. We haven't gotten back started up. We're hoping to get started by the end of the month, and it'll be every couple weeks.
Okay, perfect. So the best thing to do is to go to YouTube, find Accessible Beekeeping, and then you can subscribe and follow there. That way you can see whenever they have a new episode. And what are some things that y'all talk about? Is it all mostly just beekeeping, or is it other topics that you cover as well?
Mostly it's just beekeeping. It has interviews with people who are disabled and how they keep bees, and I basically put it together so that somebody who has spina bifida or a stroke or cerebral palsy who is looking for something to do as a hobby can go on there and find the podcast and listen to somebody else who was successful at being a beekeeper and see that they can do it too.
I love it. I really do. Justin, you were so great to talk to today. I really, really enjoyed it. Is there anything you want the listeners to know here in East Texas? Anything you wanted to add?
Just our motto, which is be different.
Be different. BEE, I would assume.
Of course.
Of course. Okay, be different. I love that. Justin Ruger, everyone. He is the founder of Accessible Beekeeping, and go to accessiblebeekeeping.org to get information there. You can donate to help his mission, and then again with the Heavenly Harvest Apiary in April 29th, they will be, that's a fundraiser event for his nonprofit as well. So, Justin, it was so great to talk to you today. I want you to know that you are truly an inspiration, and if there's anything that we can do here, of course, just reach out and I'd be more than happy to help or get the word out, whatever it is we can do to further your mission, because it is something definitely that is needed in society, and we appreciate you.
I appreciate you too. We actually, one last thing before we cancel, we actually work with colleges, and students will use their engineering background to design something such as a frame grabber or a glove for paralyzed people. So we're also working with colleges and universities to design accessible options for beekeepers.
Oh, wonderful. So even engineers are needed to further the mission. I love that. Very interesting. Again, go to accessiblebeekeeping.org. And Justin, thanks again for being with us this morning.